Did you know that a lot of people are regretting their decision to put solar panels on their home? This was promised to be one of the next best things since electricity was invented. The idea that you could put solar panels on your property or your home and never have to pay an electric bill again. However, the truth is very far from that. And I want to go over some of the pros and cons of putting solar panels on your roof or on your property, and give you an idea of what other people who have already done it have to say about it, and even how some of the new laws that are coming down from our government could influence people putting solar panels on their homes in the future. So let's start with the good stuff, because a lot of people say we don't have enough good news on this channel. So let's talk about the good stuff. Number one, lower electricity bills. Doesn't mean no electricity bill, it means lower electricity bill, at least in most cases. When you put solar panels on your property, usually you will still have a small electric bill, but essentially you are selling most of the electricity that you are producing back to the power company and kind of getting like a credit each month towards your bill. And a lot of times you don't produce more than you actually use, and that's why people still have an electricity bill even if they have solar panels. But it is possible to have no electric bill if you actually make more electricity than you consume. And why you still have to be connected to the electric grid when you have solar panels has always been beyond me. I don't have an answer for that. I think it's ridiculous. I think if you have solar panels, you should be allowed to just work completely independently off the grid, even if you're in the middle of a city or a town, whatever, and just use your own electricity. The second pro of solar panels is the fact that it is renewable and sustainable energy. As long as we have the sunshine, then we will have solar energy. That's pretty much self-explanatory. The third pro is the potential tax credits and incentives, which we'll get to later in this video. The federal government and many local governments offer tax credits, rebates, and other incentives that significantly reduce your upfront costs for putting solar panels on your property. They even have a program like this in Florida as well, where the Florida government will partially pay for you to put solar panels on your property. Another pro, or at least it's what's supposed to be a pro of getting solar panels, is it's supposed to protect you from rising energy costs, because the electric bill is one of those bills that hardly ever goes down in life. So the idea is if you have solar panels, especially if you live in a place like California where the electric bill is through the roof, then you're supposed to kind of hedge yourself against getting higher electric bills in the future, because now you're producing most of your own energy. Another pro is that in some places you can even sell your excess electricity back to the grid, generating a credit or even an income. But you need to really produce quite a bit more than you actually use in order to actually have this work, but it is possible for some people. And another pro, especially for people who do this, who live off grid and in those type of situations, is it gives them energy dependence where they actually don't have to rely on any electricity company, because there isn't one within miles of where they live. There are no power lines. So this is their only way to actually produce electricity for their property, and it gives them 100% independence and reliance on themselves. And a lot of people who do this really do like that. Now let's get into the cons, which I think there are a lot more cons than there are pros to putting on the solar panels, unfortunately. The number one thing is the high upfront costs. The purchase and installation of these solar panels can be tens of thousands of dollars. I've even heard of people paying upwards of $90,000 depending on how many panels you need, the company, the area, and the installation. It can get very nuts. Another downside is that the savings really depend on where you live and how high the electric bills are to begin with. Like if you live in an area where it's cloudy half the year, or you got 6 months of winter, like where I grew up in Illinois, and it's just overcast a lot of days, you're not going to be producing a whole lot of solar energy. Or if you live in an area where the electric bill just isn't that expensive in general, like say in most of Washington state, where it's so much cheaper than here in California, it might not even be worth the hassle or make sense to even have solar energy. The third downside is there is a very long payback period. It can take several years, anywhere between 6 to 12 years or even beyond, to recoup the initial investment through energy savings. Another downside is just the aesthetic concerns, is that they're just kind of an eyesore, especially when they're on the roof of the house. They don't necessarily look that great and can be a detractor and maybe even a turnoff for some potential home buyers, which is another situation we'll get into a little bit later on. And if you live in an HOA community, you might need to get approval from the HOA or even your local government. Or even if you don't live in an HOA, you have to get permits and permission to be able to install these, whether it's on your roof or in your yard or whatever. This is a big downside as well, is that if you sell your home, transferring a solar lease or a loan can complicate the sale process of the house. And in this market, it's already very difficult to sell a property now. And the last thing that any home seller needs is another obstacle to getting the house sold. And unfortunately, solar panels can be exactly that. And one of the main problems with solar panels is when people get them, they go into debt in order to get them. People finance solar panels that result in long-term loans that can really strain your budget. And in a lot of cases, they underperform, meaning that they're not getting as much of a benefit as they initially hoped for, and now they have this extra payment that they're stuck with on their home. Here's a house for sale that I just ran into that was last sold in 2006 for about $6.5 million. And then they actually listed it for sale back in 2021 and have been trying to sell this house ever since. They listed it for about $11.5 million back then and have been steadily lowering the price throughout the years until fast forward to today, where the price of the home is $9.5 million and it is still not sold. After $2 million price reduction and 4 years on the market, here is a house that is not selling. Looks a lot like Florida over here in parts of Northern California. And there's even a house for sale right across the street as well. Other problems with hitting the solar panels are things like a low return on investment. You know, the reduction in your electric bill just might not be enough to actually justify the cost of the system. And then you have a lot of unexpected costs that can come along with it. The panels often increase monthly expenses instead of reducing them due to the financing charges, or if there's any repairs that are not covered under a warranty, or there's damage, something like that. And to make matters even worse, your homeowner's insurance could even drop you or significantly raise your premiums if you install these solar panels on the roof of your home. Something you really need to look into before doing that. Now let's talk about some of the problems that come up when you're trying to sell your house that has solar panels on it. You have second lien complications. You know, like I said earlier, the solar panels are usually financed and that lien is attached to the home and complicates the resale of the property. And unfortunately, a lot of buyers don't want to assume solar panel debt. So you as a seller might have to cough up the dough from the sale of the property and just pay off those solar panels before even selling the house, kind of like a condo owner who owes a special assessment in order to satisfy the buyer. And another thing that's required a lot lately by insurance companies is getting a new roof on the house, especially in Florida, before you can get homeowners insurance. And one thing that's happening is sometimes when you have these solar panels installed on the roof of the property, it can actually void the roof warranty, which further affects the resale value of the property. And if you have any problems with the roof afterwards, well, guess who's going to be paying for that? Not the roofing company. Now let's talk about some of the installation and maintenance issues. You can face permit delays. You know, sometimes these installations take a year or more to be fully operational due to local regulations. You also are going to have roof damage if you install them on the roof. You can also face some unexpected expenses when your roof needs to be replaced, because let's say your roof is 20 years old, you put solar panels on and now your roof needs to be replaced. Well, a lot of times you have to foot the bill for that. You have to foot the bill for not only the roofing, the new roof, but those panels must now be removed and reinstalled at your expense, the homeowner's expense. Check out the view from up here. I'm up here on Belvedere Island today, and this is the view facing south towards Sausalito. About 68 degrees today and sunny. People ask why I come to California in the summertime. When was the last time we had a 68 and sunny degree day in Florida? Just think about that for a little bit. Probably January. Now here's a big problem when it comes to the installation of these solar panels, is that A lot of these companies can be very fly by night and can go out of business or rebrand themselves, making it hard to enforce warranties down the road. I mean, if it goes out of business, you're pretty much screwed. And if they say, well, we were bought out by another company and we're not honoring those warranties, you're also screwed. What are you going to do? Sue? Real estate agents also typically advise against getting solar panels due to the deal complications that they induce, and can also lead to lower appraisals in some cases. Because homes with solar loans often appraise lower than the loan balance, leaving sellers underwater. So say, for example, your house is worth $400,000 and you owe $300,000 on it. You have $100,000 in equity, but then you borrow 70 grand to put solar panels on. The value of your home just dropped 50 grand because the housing market's coming down. Well, now you're essentially underwater on that property, which is not a place you want to find yourself if you are selling your home. Another thing that a lot of people don't talk about is the fire hazard risk that solar panels can potentially present. Because poorly installed systems can pose fire risk, especially if there's any lithium batteries involved, which usually they are if you want to store some of that power that you're generating. So if you are somebody who does want to get solar for sure, and anything I said here doesn't dissuade you from doing it, here's a few things you want to look at. Number one, you pay cash. You don't go into debt, you don't finance the solar panels, just like anything else. If you can't afford to pay for it up front, then you truly can't afford it and you shouldn't be buying it. That's it. Also, try to avoid a roof installation. Install the panels on the ground, on the shed, or in the backyard somewhere in order to reduce some of your risks, especially when it comes to getting dropped by insurance or having roof damage or anything like that. Here's a big one. You need to vet the installation company extensively. You have to choose a long-established, reputable company that has, a long history and has been in business for a long time, that you can count on in 10 or 15 years when you need maintenance or something needs to happen with these panels. You don't want to just hire somebody offering you the best deal who just started up yesterday. And I do see a lot of people here in California that actually have solar panels. In fact, you can't really see it too well here, but you can kind of tell that they have solar panels on top of the roof of this garage here. It is kind of popular here because people in California were promised to save a lot of money from getting these solar panels, but in many cases, that promise hasn't been delivered. And now Trump's tax and spending bill is threatening some of the solar incentives that are out there currently. Right now, the proposed tax and spending package could eliminate key federal financial incentives for clean energy, especially solar, and the bill hasn't been passed yet. It passed the Senate and it's awaiting a second reading in the House, and it still needs the president's signature, but more than likely it's probably going to go. Currently, right now, the federal solar incentives are that homeowners and renters can currently claim a 30% federal tax credit on costs of installing solar panels and clean energy upgrades, things like batteries. And here in California, the average solar installation costs drop from about $16,500 to about $11,500 after applying the credit. So some of the changes that might happen if the bill passes is that there will be a new deadline for solar tax credits that could be set to expire by the end of this year in 2025. If you're leasing solar panels, you might still be able to benefit for 2 more years until the end of 2027. That isn't entirely clear yet. People who install solar systems before the deadline would still qualify for the credits, and households who already have solar installed or have paid by December 31st of 2025 can keep claiming credits over multiple tax years. So basically, it's going to be a race to get solar panels installed by the end of the year if it's something you want to take advantage of if this passes. And the problem is, here in California, they have already slashed the credits for solar customers who are trying to sell their power back to the grid. So that's kind of a broken promise, and this situation is just going to make it worse. Essentially, it's going to be like a 30% price hike for getting solar installed starting January 1st of 2026. Now I want to go over some of the comments I read in some other YouTube videos, not mine, about getting solar panels installed to see what people who have gone through this actually have to say. And there's a lot of differing opinions here. The first one is, as a guy who installs solar panels, do not ever install solar panels on a shingle roof. Poking holes in your roof will create problems later on. Also, do not ever finance solar panels. If you cannot afford to outright pay for them, do not buy them at all. Kind of like what we just said right here. And I'm not a solar panel installation guy. To me, this is also just common sense. Somebody else says, be very careful once the solar panels are installed. Sometimes the company sells out and disappears. This is really something you have to watch out for with just about anything, but especially a big installation job like solar panels. You know, it's one thing if you pay $500 to a plumber and the plumbing company disappears or goes out of business. You're not out a whole lot if you're missing some warranty work from that. But spending 15, 20, 30 grand on solar panels and then they disappear, you're in trouble. This person goes, I fell out of love with solar after working for a solar company. The more I learned about the industry, the less I associated myself with it. I literally turned down interested customers if it didn't benefit their specific situation. And it's got to be extremely specific for a homeowner to financially benefit. Plus, the average 20-year warranty expires right when the panel's functioning starts to dramatically deplete. So by the time solar is paid off, they quit working. Financing solar is how homeowners and real estate investors lose property value. There's a lot of nuggets of wisdom in that comment, and I'm so glad that people actually write, the truth in some of these comments and really spill the beans from an insider's perspective, because that's something you would just never know without hearing that. Here's a comment from somebody that actually had a positive experience. They said, a lot of people do no research and they spend a bunch of money, but my husband and I have solar. We did all the research. We ordered the batteries, the inverter, the panels, charge controller, and then we set it up ourselves. We spent about $5,000 because we did it ourselves, and we can add on if we want. We never dealt with any companies or businesses that were trying to screw us over. Well, that's a very niche example, I would definitely say, because most people just don't have the knowledge and the know-how to do something like this themselves. So 99% of the time, this isn't going to be an option for most people. Here's a comment regarding selling a house with solar panels. I can vouch for the issues with selling a house with solar panels. We lost 2 buyers once they read the contract that was signed by my in-laws when they owned the house. The buyer we sold to made us take the value still left on the contract off the total selling price, which is something I talked about earlier in this video, that this can actually cost you money as a seller if you don't own those solar panels outright. You may have to eat the cost of paying it off at the time the house is sold. Here's somebody else that had a positive experience. They say, I have solar and it powers 80% of my house and 80% of my transportation costs because I drive an EV. I installed it myself, DIY. I don't have any loans or stupid contracts. I've had it for 9 years and it's nearly paid for itself. If I sold the house, it would add about $25K of value to the sales price. And the best part is, we never lose power, even in hurricanes. For me, it's mostly about being self-sufficient. And he says, FYI, a DIY battery-backed solar power system can be done yourself for anywhere between $12,000 to $27,000, depending on how much power you need. Please do not spend $70,000 on a solar contract, which shows you that that's what a lot of people do. They spend that much money on these solar contracts, get stuck with the debt because it's finance, and then guess what? They're not able to actually turn around and sell that house for a profit because of that major loss. But this, once again, assumes that you have the ability to even do this yourself. You have to be very handy. You have to have the tools. You have to have the time, the knowledge, and have done the research to do this properly. Here's one of my viewer stories that Ron sent me. He says that my realtor was telling me one of his clients is in the process of removing his solar panels from his house. It is hurting in trying to sell the house. No one wants the extra fee of the panels. There is a service fee and the cost of the panels, which could end up being a mechanic's lien on the property. So once again, this goes back to having extra debt and extra fees attached to the property that a lot of people just aren't going to want. So you really got to think it through if it's something that you're considering. I'm not saying it's a horrible idea, but it definitely seems like there's more negatives and more drawbacks to the situation than there are positives, unless you have the handyman ability to be able to do it yourself, or you just have the money to be able to pay for it, without any trouble and not have to finance it and have extra debt attached to the house. If you fall into one of those two categories, then maybe you can make it work and it's okay. But if you need to finance it and you don't have the ability to do the work yourself, probably not a great idea. So let us all know what you guys think. Let us know about your experiences in the comments about having solar panels or potentially getting solar panels, if it's something that you were considering doing or not. Let us all know. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.